Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I wanted to talk about the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy by Tad Williams. This is an epic fantasy trilogy that I really enjoyed, so I don't really have anything negative to say about this book overall. I think it's a very solid trilogy, and if you're a fantasy lover, you'll probably enjoy this. I wouldn't recommend this as an entry point to fantasy. So that is my one kind of caveat, is that if you are looking for an entry point, I don't think that this is necessarily the trilogy to start with. I don't think the story is necessarily convoluted or overly complicated, and I do think that Tad Williams uses a lot of elements to make the world feel somewhat familiar. So all of those things make it a little bit more readable and digestible, but just based on the level of world building and how dense the world building is, I would recommend this maybe after you've read a couple other fantasy books. Another potential drawback for someone just starting out in fantasy especially is the length. So these are very hefty books. The first in the trilogy, The Dragonbone Chair, it is over 600 pages. The middle book, Stone of Farewell, is like 580 pages. And the last in the trilogy, To Green Angel Tower, is a little over 1,000 pages. And these are the trade paperback versions, so they are really lengthy. So the length could be a barrier to some. I don't think that's necessarily a con, because the world is very immersive and very well fleshed out. I want to talk a little bit about the story, about the plot of this book. Like I said, it's not overly convoluted. There are other things in the book that are maybe a little bit more dense or hard to get into, but the story itself is kept relatively simple. If you wanted to condense it down to its core, it is a coming-of-age story featuring a quest to basically prevent the destruction of the world from an evil force. That is very oversimplified, and that might sound a little unoriginal, but I think the world and the characters really elevate that simple story to something a lot greater. All of the villains in the story have motivation that makes sense. Even the ones that are maybe more purely evil than other villains, they still have their reasons for doing what they are doing. The story really starts with the dying of a monarch that's been on the throne, on the Dragonbone Chair, for countless decades. And this king is really a legend. He's become legend in this world. He has two sons, one who inherits the throne and the other who obviously does not. You have brothers on somewhat opposite sides. You have alliances that are being formed with evil forces. But even though that's kind of the kernel of how the main conflict of the book starts, the book is not so much about the king or his sons, even though they are the catalyst for the plot. The story is about Simon. Simon is our underdog. He's the representation of the normal, everyday person. He is a scullery boy. He works in the kitchens of the castle, and he daydreams about going on adventures and going on quests, but he is very much a normal person, and he's a character that you can really root for. It's Simon's coming of age story. He's the center of this narrative, even though it's really about all of these other things happening in this world. And we do see the perspective of many different characters. He is the main character of the story. And something I want to say about the characters in the story is that they are, all of them, somewhat nuanced. Even characters that are pretty secondary to the story, they're given a life, they're given a background, they're given personality traits, they are given a bit of nuance. everyone had a little bit of messiness about them. Even the ones you really root for have a little bit of messiness about them. Simon, as I said, is the main character, and you can really root for him. He's got a really good kind of like moral compass. He wants to do right, but he is a teenage boy and he can be kind of annoying. He doesn't have a lot of confidence. He doesn't believe in himself to the point where you kind of want to slap him around a little bit. But that's what makes a character feel real. He's this annoying teenager. He's always moping, and all of that can be a bit annoying, but it doesn't get pushed into the like super annoying category because Simon is a good person. He wants to do right. He has a good heart. He really cares about other people, and you just can't help but to like him. I can't go through very many of the characters because there are so many and they all have all of these different facets to them. But another couple of characters I do want to mention because I also liked their differing sides to their personalities. One being Joshua. So Joshua is one of the two sons of the king. He's the one who did not inherit the throne. He was really written as someone who you could tell was not suited to lead. He tries to lead a rebellion, but he overthinks things. When he's strategizing, he hesitates, he delays constantly because he wants to look at something through every single possible angle. And sometimes as a leader, you just have to go forward and make a decision. And he is kind of stifled by his indecisiveness. And even his own men get a little bit frustrated with that. It's coming from a good place because he doesn't want to lose men. He doesn't want people under his command, under his care and protection to be killed. He wants to be measured and methodical, but to a point where it becomes a bit of a character flaw. And that's a type of personality that I personally haven't really seen represented much in fantasy where you have like dueling factions. Another character I wanted to mention was the Princess Miriamel. She's another interesting character because she's written as this quite headstrong, daring, very brave person. She wants to take matters into her own hands. She is very action driven, unlike her uncle Joshua. However, she rushes into things. She doesn't really think too far ahead. She makes a decision and then she acts on it. And it's not even really, I think, apparent at first when you're reading things that she's doing that that's how she is, because you're kind of rooting for her. Yes, take action, take matters into your own hands, Miriamel, you go. But then as you're reading what's happening, you realize slowly, oh, you haven't thought this through at all, and you're putting other people at risk because now they're going to have to go after you because you're the princess and all of these things. And she really doesn't think outside of the matter at hand. So another character that is multifaceted and that you like, but that also has elements of their personality that can grate on your nerves a bit. Another interesting point about the characters in this book is that Tad Williams doesn't use the typical traditional fantasy races, besides humans, I guess, which really aren't a fantasy race, but men exist in this world. But all of the other races, there are no dwarves or elves or anything like that. And it makes the world feel really unique and unlike other fantasy worlds. And I think it really makes you buy into this world. And that was one of my favorite things about this book, was the world building. So like I said, the length might be a deterrent to some people, and it is a dense world building experience. But once you kind of get used to the world, once you feel a little bit more familiar with the characters and the places, it just is very, very immersive and very rich and feels like a real place. There is language woven in. There is a lot of different culture woven in. There are different religions in different locations. The geography is very well thought out. All of these elements, the language and culture and geography, just make for a really rich reading experience. The last thing that I want to mention are the themes in this book. The main, I guess, conversation in this book that really jumped out at me was legends and truth. The story gets started when a living legend dies and his son takes the throne. And this book really explores this idea of legend, how regular people become legend and become larger than life through the stories that we tell about them. It really explores what happens when history slowly gets morphed into story and lore. And I think these books do a great job of slowly meeting out bits of the truth. And it feels genuine because that's what happens in real life. You look back at history and there are these figures, these larger than life figures that jump out of history books and they become almost mythical. And that's something that I just thought these books did so well, of taking that idea of myth and legend and how it comes from normal people and normal places and putting it in this fantasy environment. So those are my thoughts on the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. If you enjoy fantasy, I would wholeheartedly recommend this series. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll chat soon. Take care. Bye.